Did you know that Max Verstappen is increasingly frustrated with his car despite still being on the podium? And what just happened at the Spanish Grand Prix could be the start of a drastic change for Red Bull. Let me know in the comments, do you think Verstappen will stay if Red Bull doesn't improve soon? What's going on inside the team that's calling into question its dominance in F1? Today we're going to analyze why Red Bull's performance in qualifying for the 2025 Spanish Grand Prix has raised so many questions about its future and that of Max Verstappen. Red Bull arrived at the 2025 Spanish Grand Prix under pressure not seen in years. After a disappointing performance in Monaco, where Max Verstappen could only manage a fourth-place finish, warning signs began to sound loudly within the Austrian team. The team knew Barcelona would be a turning point. This circuit not only tests engine power, but also aerodynamic efficiency, traction in slow corners, and the car's overall balance. It's the kind of track that reveals, without a filter, who is truly ready to fight for the championship and who is simply surviving. Max Verstappen managed to qualify in third place with a time of 1 minute and 11.848 seconds. At first glance, it may seem like a good result, but if we analyze the details, the situation becomes much more worrying. McLaren's Oscar Piastri edged him by 0.3 and took pole. George Russell matched his time, and just by recording his lap afterward, he fell behind Max. The difference between third and fourth was a matter of thousandths of a second. That tells us two things. First, the competition is no longer chasing Red Bull, it's competing head-to-head. Second, Verstappen is maximizing everything the RB21 can give him, but the car is clearly no longer the most dominant. And that, in Formula One, can change an entire season. Now, the most striking thing wasn't Verstappen's third place, but his teammate's catastrophe. Yuki Tsunoda was eliminated in Q1 with a time of 1 minute and 13.385 seconds, the slowest of the entire grid. A gap of more than 1.5 seconds over Max. In the same car, under the same conditions. That's not only alarming, it's a sign of deeper problems. Red Bull engineers attributed this to a lack of balance of the RB21 in low-speed sectors, especially at turn 3, where Tsunoda lost up to 0.7. But behind that technical explanation, there's a worrying reality. The car no longer adapts as easily to different driving styles. And that could mean the RB21 setup margin has become too narrow. When a team relies entirely on a single driver to perform, it becomes an internal threat. Because if that driver tires of carrying the load alone, what looked like a championship-winning team can become an unstable machine. And that's precisely what many are starting to wonder. How much longer will Verstappen endure this pressure without a clear response from the technical team? Red Bull can no longer afford to simply compete. It needs to dominate again. But qualifying in Barcelona showed a version of the team struggling to stay on top, not one setting the pace for the championship. On-track results are one thing. But in Formula One, what's not seen often has more impact than what appears on the timesheets. And right now, what's not being said publicly is what's generating the most tension within the paddock. For several weeks now, a constant murmur has been brewing among specialist journalists, technical analysts, and even members of other teams. Max Verstappen could be considering a team change. The idea of him leaving Red Bull seemed unthinkable a few months ago. But the pressure, the limitations of the RB21, and McLaren's competitive explosion have revived a theory that seemed buried. The first signs appeared after the Monaco Grand Prix. Verstappen was visibly annoyed by the lack of pace in slow sectors. But in Spain, that discomfort turned into strategic frustration. During qualifying, Max was clear in his statements. The car continues to struggle in technical corners, and that compromises the goal of fighting for every pole position. When a driver like Verstappen, with 4 world titles and a reputation for not tolerating mediocrity, starts directly pointing out the car's mechanical limitations, rumors start to spread. This isn't just technical criticism. It's a form of public pressure, a direct message to the team. If they don't give me what I need, I'll look elsewhere. And that's precisely what Ferrari has begun to interpret as an opportunity. Several unconfirmed reports suggest that discreet moves have already been made from Maranello to gauge Max's entourage. It's not a formal offer, but there are exploratory talks. A kind of what-if that could become a real plan if Red Bull doesn't react in time. Ferrari, for its part, is in a period of transition. With Leclerc established and Hamilton still adapting, adding Verstappen would not only be a dramatic impact, but a declaration of intent to dominate the next era of F1. And more importantly, it would deprive Red Bull of its main weapon. This doesn't mean Max will leave tomorrow, but it does mean that there are no longer any guarantees that his permanence will be assured beyond his contract. Because in Formula One, contracts can be broken. What matters is performance, projection, and above all, confidence. Internally at Red Bull, these rumors have been treated with great secrecy. No one wants to show cracks. But analysts know, when a star driver starts speaking with a more critical tone than usual, and at the same time other teams are closing in, it's because something is changing. The psychological factor also counts. Verstappen has been competing at the highest level for years, and he knows that his window of dominance won't last forever. If he feels Red Bull can't evolve at the pace he needs, he won't hesitate to look elsewhere. And that possibility, today, is no longer a fantasy. What was once just another season to defend the championship has become a minefield full of uncertainties. Every race, every technical update, every strategy error, everything counts. And as long as the car's performance doesn't live up to its ambition, the rumor mill will only grow louder. Within Red Bull, two voices dominate the scene. On one hand, Max Verstappen, the most decisive driver of the modern era. On the other, Christian Horner, the strategist who has kept the team at the top. But lately, those two voices no longer sound in unison. And that has a clear meaning. Verstappen was blunt after qualifying in Barcelona. He didn't try to smooth things over. He didn't resort to diplomatic phrases. He spoke his mind, and he did so with the tone of someone no longer willing to wait. He openly acknowledged that the car continues to fail in slow corners, that the RB21 has suffered mechanical limitations since the beginning of the season, and that, despite his efforts, the problem has not been corrected. This kind of statement is unusual for him. Max has always been direct, yes, but also reserved when it comes to the internal work of his team. That he has exposed the car's weaknesses with such clarity is a sign that frustration is reaching rock bottom. Beyond the technical aspects, what can be perceived in his body language, his gaze, and his pauses is that he's no longer comfortable. And that's something Red Bull can't ignore. Because when the number one driver starts to lose confidence, the effect is multiplied inside the garage. The team feels it. The engineers feel it. The entire environment begins to tense up. On the other hand, Christian Horner has tried to remain calm. In his public statements, he has been optimistic, but his message has a defensive tone. He admitted that the new front wing was a forced response to Technical Directive TD018 and acknowledged that its implementation is still recent. It's a step in the right direction, he said, but avoided talking about immediate results. That phrase, in context, reveals a different strategy. While Verstappen calls for solutions now, Horner speaks of a gradual evolution. Red Bull is betting on stability, on moving forward without taking risks, on building a more solid foundation. But the problem is that, in this modern Formula One, there is no time to wait. McLaren has shown that it is possible to evolve quickly, that it is possible to adapt a car, integrate new parts, and find performance in just a few weeks. Ferrari, although more inconsistent, has also shown worrying peaks of speed. In this scenario, Red Bull cannot afford a prolonged learning curve. Not if it wants to retain Verstappen. Not if it wants to continue fighting for the title. The tension between the driver's urgency and the team's caution could become a deep rift. And time is ticking. The upcoming races won't just be about scoring points. They will be a test of confidence. Every detail will count. Every conversation between Max and the engineers. Every decision on the pit road. Everything will be scrutinized with a magnifying glass of discontent. Furthermore, there is one factor that cannot be ignored, the abysmal gap between Verstappen and Tsunoda in qualifying. More than 1.5 seconds. That is unacceptable on a technical level. And while many interpret this as a sign of Max's superior talent, it also reflects the car's inconsistency. Only a driver with Verstappen's experience and sensitivity can get the most out of him. Such dependence is unsustainable in such a competitive championship. Meanwhile, Red Bull maintains they have room for improvement. But that room, for now, lies more in statements than in results. And Max, with his driving style and his personal demands, is no longer satisfied with promises. He wants certainties. He wants a car that allows him to attack every corner, every lap, without losing valuable tenths of a second due to structural errors. The gap between the team's rhetoric and the driver's thinking is widening. And if it isn't narrowed soon, the connection could be broken beyond repair. The possibility of Max Verstappen changing teams is no longer just a hypothetical scenario. It's a real option that, although quietly discussed, is being evaluated from different angles within the paddock. And if it were to materialize, the effect would be seismic for the entire Formula One team. The first impact, without a doubt, would be on Red Bull. Verstappen's departure would mean losing the driver who has sustained the team's success in recent times. It's not just about his driving ability, but also his strategic presence. Max doesn't just race. Max leads, pushes, demands, shapes the technical development of the car. Losing a driver like that isn't replacing talent, it's rebuilding an identity. Red Bull would have to rethink its entire project, from its aerodynamic approach to the way it manages its driver lineup. With Tsunoda still failing to demonstrate consistency, and without a significant replacement in its immediate academy, they would be forced to look outside the system, something they have historically avoided. It would be, in short, the end of an era. But the change wouldn't be limited to Red Bull alone. The team that managed to sign Verstappen would automatically gain a new status within the championship. If that team were Ferrari, for example, we'd be talking about an explosive lineup alongside Charles Leclerc or Lewis Hamilton. Marketing, internal morale, and public perception would all rise instantly. On a competitive level, the landscape would also change radically. Verstappen is one of the few drivers who can alter the overall performance of a car with his driving. His ability to compensate for technical weaknesses, his consistency in the race, his aggressiveness without compromising the result, all of these represent extra points. And in such a close championship, those points can decide titles. In addition, there would be a reconfiguration of the psychological balance on the grid. Teams like McLaren, which now compete confidently against Red Bull, could face a new direct rival strengthened by Max's presence. The pressure would be redistributed. Strategies would change. Even engineers and technicians could be tempted to follow him, as has happened in the past with other top drivers. Another knock-on effect would be on the driver market. A Verstappen departure would generate an immediate domino effect. Current contracts would become worthless. Teams that currently feel stable would have to restructure their vision for the next 3 to 5 years. Max's arrival would move things around at all levels. There would also be political consequences within F1. The relationship between Red Bull and the FIA has been strained recently by various technical decisions, including the implementation of Technical Directive TD018. If Verstappen felt that these decisions directly affected his ability to compete, he could use his presence to push even harder or even remove himself from that environment. And that would open up larger debates about the direction the championship is taking. The public, for its part, also plays a role. Verstappen's fanbase is one of the strongest and most committed. Wherever he goes, the followers follow him. And that represents millions in viewers, global visibility, and pressure on brands. A move by him would have implications for sponsorships, commercial deals, and even the narrative that Formula One promotes on its official channels. In short, Verstappen isn't just a winning driver. He's a transformative figure. And if he decides to change teams, it would alter the entire championship map. In the short term, it would be a crushing blow for Red Bull. In the medium term, it would redefine who controls the next generation of racing. The decisive moment is closer than it seems. If Red Bull wants to retain Max Verstappen and remain the team to beat, it can't wait any longer. The next few weeks represent the final call before rumors become decisions. And everything will depend on what happens in the next 3 Grand Prix. The team has confirmed a second phase of updates for the RB21. These improvements are scheduled to debut at the Canadian Grand Prix. This is no coincidence. Montreal is a circuit that combines long straights with intense braking zones and low-speed corners. It's the ideal place to test whether they have truly corrected the car's structural weaknesses. One of the most anticipated modifications is the redesign of the rear axle. According to technical leaks, Red Bull plans to adjust the rear suspension system to improve traction when exiting slow corners. This has been one of the car's most consistent weaknesses. If this update works, they could recover at least 0.2 per lap in key sectors. Another important point will be the brake cooling system. On urban or semi-urban circuits like Montreal, thermal management is essential. Red Bull hopes to reduce tire degradation in high-temperature conditions, an advantage currently held by Mercedes. This technical detail may seem minor, but in a race as close as this year's, it can mean the difference between victory and a frustrating podium finish. But beyond the technical improvements, what's really at stake is Verstappen's confidence. Every new part installed on the car will be scrutinized. Every lap in free practice, every reaction of the car in qualifying and the race will have symbolic value. Because Max is no longer racing just to win races. He's racing to decide his future. The team knows there's no room for error. If the improvements don't perform as expected, the blow will be double. They will lose ground against McLaren and Ferrari, and internal pressure will increase on the engineers on Horner and on the entire structure that sustains Red Bull as a powerhouse. Furthermore, the calendar doesn't help. After Canada, come circuits like Silverstone and Hungary, two tracks with very different technical demands, which will make it difficult to stabilize the car if the foundation isn't solid. Red Bull needs not only to improve, but to do so consistently in different scenarios. That's what can give them back the advantage they've lost. The most delicate aspect is that the season has already entered its critical phase. Every point lost now will be impossible to recover later. And every detail that doesn't work, every tenth of a second that doesn't appear, will be one more reason for Verstappen to doubt his continuity. The upcoming races won't just be technical challenges. They will be emotional tests for a team that is the center of attention. Meanwhile, their rivals won't wait. McLaren is on the rise, with a cohesive technical structure and two drivers who are increasingly showing solidity. Ferrari, although more inconsistent, is determined not to be left behind and continues to work on aggressive developments. Red Bull can't afford a lukewarm response. It needs impact. It needs immediate results. In short, what happens in Canada will be a real test of the bar. If the upgrades work, Max might regain motivation and trust in the team's long-term plan. But if not, that could be the moment when his decision starts to lean toward a change. And once that happens, it's nearly impossible to reverse.